Hey, it's me, Rob Ryan, and I am back for another, some of you might think to be an unexpected, but really insightful and thoughtful conversation on this week's episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers with Leta McCollough Seletzky. Leta is the director of the Masters in Fine Arts Writing program at the University of Nevada, Reno, Lake Tahoe campus. And we talk about the fundamental importance and the opportunity for all of us to think differently about how we write, how we literally communicate our thoughts with others. And we explore the importance of learning how to and owning being able to write out our thoughts in today's world, whether that be digitally in all the digital social formats that we exist in, or whether that be in long form in the more traditional methods. So if you are a business person who needs to communicate your message, if you're an entrepreneur who needs to communicate your story, if you're an investor who needs to communicate how you interact with entrepreneurs and others, if you're a leader of any kind of institution or organization professionally anywhere, you're going to realize how important it is that we all become really effective at writing and communicating our thoughts, as well as writing and communicating and passing on history and facts and truth. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as Leta and I did making it for you.
We are so grateful to be supported by these community champions: Sales MD, Team Friday, Realist Lab, Kiana Patterson, Diego Chavez, Jer Boucher, Heather Ryder, Janine Sua, Lily Roca, and Steve Kernan.
Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. As you may or may not be aware, this is the show where I get the privilege, honestly, to have weekly conversations with some of the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of society and industry, as we come together to try, as my mom used to implore me, to just leave the world a little bit better than we found it. Today, I am really excited, very honored to be joined by Leta McCollough Seletzky, who is a prolific author, writer, and director of the Low Residency Masters in Fine Arts Creative Writing program at the University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe campus. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Leta before we meet her, and then we're going to have a fascinating conversation about something which I bet most of my listeners would not consider to be something that we would talk about in the world of entrepreneurial thinking in this show, but we're going to show you why it is today. So let me tell you a little bit more about Leta. As I said, she's not just a writer. She's a storyteller and a teacher of storytelling whose truth-telling, frankly, just reaches across generations. She's a former government lawyer turned award-winning essayist and now professor of writing. She's had her words featured in publications that we all know, and some probably like more than others, but I love them: the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, the Washington Monthly, and beyond. In our complicated world today, who better to help us write than someone who deeply understands the power of words and also the rule of law? She holds a JD from George Washington University Law School and a BA from Northwestern. Go Cats. There's a whole Chicago side of me to that reference there. And is an alumna of the 2016 Community of Writers at Squaw Valley Nonfiction and Screenwriting Workshops program, as well as the, and I may mispronounce this, Desrasi Residence Artist Program, which is a year-long writing your book length narrative workshop. So she's really good at writing. Also, if you're watching this on our video feed, you'll see she's got a perfect library set up for writing, filled with books. Her memoir, The Kneeling Man, unpacked her father's life as a Black undercover spy who witnessed up close, I mean, arguably as close as one could get, one of the defining moments in American history, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, which is a story that is both intimate and historic for many of us Americans, especially of my generation. From courtrooms to classrooms, her own essays, Leta's journey is one of reinvention, honoring the legacies that we carry in our blood, and then now teaching others how to capture and share their stories with vision and courage. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers, Leta. It's great to have this conversation with you.
It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much for thinking of me for this.
No, my pleasure. And I love that when I reached out with my idea about what we're going to talk about, you were like, thank you. No one ever wants to talk to me about this stuff. They only ever want to talk to me about that stuff. So we're going to touch on that stuff a little bit. Obviously, it's a part of who you are and your history. But really, the thing that drew me to you in our online friendship, and the thing that drew me to this possibility of a conversation, was that this topic, which we're about to dive into, has been rattling around my brain for a year or so now. And so I'm going to hit you with one kind of big opening question, a little bit fun, a little bit silly, but also kind of serious in its undertone, that I think will get us started in the right direction. I want to know, you tell me, since you're the professor of this stuff, is AI writing everything for everybody nowadays?
It certainly seems like it's being positioned to do that. And I've noticed more and more how intrusive it's become every time I want to send an email, every time I want to type a document or post something on social media. There's a little button or a little prompt to say, hey, do you want AI to do this for you? My answer is always no. And it's almost become the new Clippy. If, everyone remembers Clippy from the old Word, Microsoft Word.
We're dating ourselves now. That's okay. You did it, not me.
Right. We've seen some things. We've been out here, and it's reminding me of Clippy a little bit in its obnoxiousness. I mean, to me, because I feel that there has been an unfortunate confusion between the means of creation, including writing, and the ends of creation and writing. Now, AI can certainly be a tool. It can certainly be a means to get to the point of communicating. But to my mind, the end of writing and of all creative acts and communication is human connection. So by definition, for me, AI does not check that box. And so it does seem like AI is intruding more and more into our relationships and in our ability to connect. And I am not anti-AI. I certainly think it has its place, and whether we want to use it or not, we are using it. It's pretty much intertwined in much of what we do, particularly in the digital space. But I think that we must always keep in mind these first principles of communication, of storytelling, which is the idea and the end goal is human connection.
Yeah, wonderfully said. And I completely concur, right? Like we use it as a tool. Full disclosure, people who've listened to this podcast know this before. We use it as a tool to kind of help us pre-populate the blank page of our scripts. But then I get assigned that homework by Deanna, our wonderful show producer, and it's my job to, as she would say, like robify it, like humanize it, turn it into actual questions that are the questions that I'm curious about, that I want to engage in this conversational art, which is what I consider this to be, with someone over. And even as the tool has learned the way we fed it, and supposedly then the question should be more reflective of me from the get-go, I find that they're not. Like I find sometimes where I'm just like, you know what, you don't even have to pre-populate it. I'm just going to write the questions anyways, because the questions asked, like in this particular use case, the questions feed and seem to almost ask like predictable podcasty questions. Right. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like every question that I've heard poorly asked on every other podcast I've ever listened to by bad podcasters. Right. I'm like, oh, there's nothing original about that. And at the very least in this show, these conversations are original. Like this is happening between you and I as humans right now. I love that. Thank you for that insight. As we dive into this further, I'm curious, and this is what I'm about to ask you is the root question that was rattling around my brain for a couple of years, right? So in this world that you just described, right, where everything is telling us not only are we writing maybe less and less, but I'll inject that we're reading less and less. And I went and did some research, and I don't have all the data. Everybody can find it themselves. They can research it the same way I can. But the decline in readers and the number of books we read, or the amount of books we read, or the time we spend reading is precipitous, like in the last 25 or so years. So this predates AI. So in that combined world that's converging, why do you still try to teach people to become excellent writers?
The reason is because as reading is precipitously declining, as you so correctly have pointed out, the ability to write cogently and coherently is becoming an even more valuable skill because of its rarity. And I think there will always be a place for a person who can express themselves well on the page and who understands on a craft level what works and why it works and is able to execute that. And also, I mean, that comes into play even in using some of these digital tools. As you mentioned, there is the ability to have AI spit out questions for an interview, but the ability to discern whether these are good or well-formulated questions depends on, how well you're able to understand, analyze, and use writing skills, which really comes down to critical thinking skills. And I think is fundamental to what it is to be human. A part of what makes us human is language, the ability to use language, the ability to tell stories. And I think back to this idea of even at the dawn of human civilization, human beings gathered around a fire, sharing stories, telling stories, and not only in an oral tradition, but visually as well. We've, of course, have various cave paintings and creations, physical media, visual art. And so this goes to the heart of what it is to be human. And if we separate ourselves from that, I feel that we are separating ourselves from what it means to be a human being and to have a soul.
And if we do that, we essentially ourselves then leave ourselves as a species vulnerable to being replaced or displaced by the technologies that we otherwise could choose to live alongside.
Exactly, because then we become fungible. And I mean, the thing about AI also is that by its very nature, it is derivative. It depends on what already exists, what human minds have come up with, good and bad. And there's plenty of bad that goes into it. And of course, there's this idea of garbage in, garbage out that we must always keep in mind. But it's by its nature derivative. And so to me, by definition, it is not creative. It's a tool that can be used to create, but there must always be that human input. And the more skill that we have to bring to bear, the more of a valuable voice and actor we will be in society.
Yeah, boy, wow. This is both a great history lesson, like a good reminder for all of us of kind of from where we came. And again, no matter you and I as proxies, a little bit older, a little bit more life experience, we might be serving as proxies for the younger generation who are like, well, this isn't what we've grown up understanding. So thank you for the lessons, right? Or just reinforcing for ourselves that like this is ultimately the battle. And when I say battle, like I don't want to pitch it as some existential thing, this versus that. That is where it could go. Like we could allow it to go that way if we so like acquiesce to it, right? But what I love is this idea that it's a tool. Like I think it has the potential to be a hugely useful tool. No different than I thought that the internet 30 some odd years ago had the potential to be a hugely useful tool. It also, as evidenced by our life on the internet nowadays, has shown us that it has the potential to be a hugely destructive tool. And hugely not helpful, right, to like our existence as a species and society as a whole. So, like, I think it's more about, and I'm exploring these conversations with people like you because I want to enter into the kind of archive of history, right? This contemplation of, hey, we do have the right to have these discussions to try and figure out what we should do with these things that we have. Right. We don't just have to acquiesce to like, well, it's going to do it for us. In spite of the fact, as you say, there might be lots of people who would be like, I don't want to write that email. So yeah, prompt man, write that email. And maybe they'll get away with that for some period of their career or their studies or their lives in general. But at some point they won't have developed the, as you say, human capital, right? The social capital that we trade between each other that develops some modicum of trust and respect for, based and rooted in like our relationship digitally, like rooted in the way we express ourselves in words And in our case, we met in an online format, Threads, which felt like we would have met if there had been a better Twitter, like 10 years ago, right? But it's rooted in like, oh, this is a person who can, as you say, very cogently, thoughtfully, articulately express wide perspectives in a very limited number of words. Like, that's an impressive feat in today's world. So, all right, take you back to the mechanical part of this. We understand the importance of why. How are we teaching people to write in a world that is prompting them with the Clippy and saying like, I'll write it for you? Like, how are we doing this?
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Chisos Capital. Everyone knows that raising capital is hard. And frankly, finding the next pool of entrepreneurs to get access to as limited investors is sometimes impossible too. Do you have a big idea, a dream you're building, but you're struggling to find early funding? Well, Chisos is changing the game for founders, creators, athletes, and investors. Whether you're launching a startup, growing your creative brand, or training for the big leagues, Chisos backs you. Chisos uniquely invests up to $100,000 in people, not just products, whether they be entrepreneurs, creators, or even athletes. With their unique CISA model, convertible income share agreements, founders get flexible funding without giving up equity or ownership, and investors get attractive returns and great upside with less risk. Chisos works for both investors and the people bringing our world to life. If you're seeking access to a truly diverse pool of deals, or you're someone who feels overlooked by the VC game, Chisos is ready to back you. So apply now at chisos.io.
Well, it starts with this natural desire that I think people have inborn in them to communicate and to connect, because I think the bottom line is connection. I mean, that is the end of writing. I mean, in a sense, writing is really a means to that end of connection. So it starts with that very human, innate desire to connect. And there are, I would say, forces and influences in this world that sort of dull that sense, or that maybe cause us to sublimate it or put it in different places. But if we just go with that innate sense, then we very naturally and organically are moved into language. I mean, that's part of human development. We see this in early childhood development. And then as we progress through language, we progress into reading, which is something that's expected of people in this society. And I always say that the best writers are the best readers. And reading is something that captures a lot of people from an early age. I was one of those people that just loved books, was always in a book for, I think, in some ways, maybe for escapist purposes, but also because it was a way of walking in another life, another existence. I saw one writer put it, I can't remember which writer it was, but they said that books are, and I'm paraphrasing, they're kind of like a flight simulator for life. And certainly I kind of felt that way. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And so those of us who feel very strongly that way and feel that they have some call or draw to books and writing are certainly going to be looking for ways to build community and to connect and to express what we want to express. And so the mechanics of how that happens, is through the ways that we organize in community around affinities. And so that happens socially in writing groups. That happens in a very organized educational way. For example, in the program that I head up at the University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe, this is the low residency Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program. And so this is a way for people who want to achieve a terminal degree in creative writing, but also have other demands on their lives, whether that's a job, as a caregiver, or what have you. We're able to come together twice a year in 10-day residencies, work on our craft, workshop our work, and then outside of that, take part in one-on-one intensive mentorships. But all of this is, with a view toward becoming writers and putting our work out in the world to keep this cycle going of readers connecting.
Yeah, I'm sold. I mean, it's also funny. As I'm listening to you, I'm hearing echoes of. So my daughter, 30-ish years old now, is a television writer, and was a reader. Was that voracious reader as a little kid, and I didn't know I was helping her become a writer when I was trying to be the best dad I could be, right? But I did know that reading was probably a good thing, and I knew that the more she read, the happier she was, and so we fed her more books and it took her to different places and it helped her to navigate the realities of the world she lived in. And ultimately now she's on the professional side of the world saying like, okay, oh my God, now are there going to be television series anymore, right? Are they going to want my stories to be written anymore? Or is AI going to do it all? And so she's fighting on the front lines of that, but ultimately is still just immersed in the root human emotion of believing that storytelling in any context and form will persist no matter what happens technologically, right? So I'm curious, you're a mom. I'm a dad now. I'm a grandpa because she's got a new baby, so that's the best job ever, by the way. And I'm curious though, I've got nieces, one who happens to be a voracious reader and a very eager writer, who's a senior in high school now. How do we as parents that are listening, right, inspire the millennials, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas to see not just the importance of it, right? Like, hey, writing's an important skill to have no matter what the computer is telling you, but to truly value it as a means of expression for themselves.
I think it begins with modeling the values that we want to, you know, uh, kind of amplify in the world. And so I think that just by watching us, I think you can learn a lot about what's important to people and what matters by not so much what they say as what they actually do. And so I think a lot of it comes down to just modeling that. And, there's this idea of if you can see it, you can be it. And so I think just doing what we do and existing in the world is doing something. I think it's communicating better than any sort of, sit down conversation or essay or PSA would ever do.
It's funny, right? I was thinking about this niece in particular, and her younger sister is less of a excited writer, right? She leans more, not to make it so binary, but she leans more kind of the science math kid. Her brain is just wired that way, and that gets her sparked up, right? Whereas this one doesn't. And the older one, I'm thinking of her. One of the things as Uncle Rob, like the trusted person in the family, as she's gone through her teenage years, is just obviously text and DMs and all that kind of communication, right? And that's writing, right? It's very truncated, very short, and sometimes full of little, strange euphemisms and things that emojis and things that are used to express things. But that's writing. And so one of the things, rather than saying to her, like pushing her away and saying like, no, like I only call me or FaceTime me, right? Is I was just like, hey, if this is how she communicates, I'll make myself available to her in a way that her parents probably don't every day, right? And then she'll always know she can communicate. And now as she's gotten older, like, and I feed back to it, like the threads get longer, right? And now it's like, oh, I sent you this link to this article, and what do you think? And then we're having whole discussions about politics and philosophy and freedom of speech and different things in today's world, right? Via just text and DMs, but it's her expressing herself in written form. And then when her mom will send me the recognition from her school that says like, here's her AP English teacher last year who wrote this incredible college recommendation letter for her. Read this because I know it'll make you proud, Uncle Rob. And I read it and I'm like, well, yeah, she's a good writer. Like I've known that for a long time. Like me and her AP English teacher both know that she's an incredibly gifted communicator when it comes to writing. So just the modeling of it, just by being in that way in our household. Are there ways, let's try and help people who maybe aren't you and I, right? Like, are there ways for the parent or the role model who isn't pre-inclined to be a reader or a writer, but looks at their child who maybe is super creative or does lean into these things, are there practical ways to help encourage that? If you can't model it yourself, are there practical ways to encourage and enable a young person to still see the value of writing?
Absolutely. And I think that, first of all, there is that modeling piece of just reading yourself. I mean, if you really think it's important, then you're engaging with, written work. But also, it comes back to this idea of connection and knowing that child, knowing what their interests are, and not really dictating to them what to read, but knowing that child enough to know what they're interested in and presenting opportunities for them to engage with that kind of material. And I always, with my boys, I have 3 boys. And so, it wasn't always necessarily, my favorite stuff that, I was ending up having to present to them. But hey, if they want books about Pokemon or whatever, let's do this, let's do the graphic novels. And again, to me, the medium is not so important. So, you talk about posting or sending text with emoji, that's still writing. And as an aside, I would say that posting on social media has really, I think, made me a better writer. I think that it has, shown me how to really economize on words and get an impactful message out there in a way that engages with people. And I think that is a two-way street, by the way, this engagement piece. But back to the question. So yes, knowing that child, knowing what they're interested in, and then providing the opportunities for them to engage with it. And that can be, again, cartoons. I mean, that counts, like a graphic, a comic book, audiobooks, Audible. I mean, that is reading as well. It's not about the medium. It's about, the storytelling and the connection and the use of language.
Boy, as a devoted Audible subscriber and reader, let me say, I had a room that had a back wall, not side walls like yours, but I had a back wall that had lots of books on it. Back about 10 years ago, before I moved to Latin America for a stretch. And while prepping for that trip and donating, trashing, giving away everything that I owned, donating all the books to local libraries and churches, I found Audible. It was like 2015, right? And man, if I haven't had people tell me like hundreds of times since then that I'm not reading when I'm listening to books on Audible, I'm like, that's nonsense. I'm like, these are written books that just are being read to me, because I realized as I was moving to South America, I couldn't take all these books with me, nor would I want to. And secondly, I was like, at that time, in that era, still, you couldn't buy books on Amazon and have them shipped to Chile, for example, or Argentina. And so I was like, all right, I got to find them. And I was like, oh, this is great. I can listen to books as I walk, which is something I do prolifically every week. So yeah, I love that. And now, as I'm sure is in the case in your world, like in this conversation I've been having with this agency about potentially writing a book, they were like, oh, and we could also help you get it into Audible because we have these relationships with Amazon, which owns Audible. And I was like, awesome. And I took the great compliment. He was like, and you know what? Usually we have to hire talent to voice over narrate those books. He's like, you've got the voice for this. Like, you'll be fine. So I was like, okay, this will be fun. So yes, Audible is definitely, and I love that idea of just understanding understanding your children or your kids or your nieces or the younger people in your family. And if you see that instinct around reading and writing, like, encourage that, facilitate it through Pokemon or whatever else it is that the boys want to learn about. All right, I'm curious. I was watching the Emmys this weekend. Obviously, I have a predilection to television, as already mentioned. I'm trying to manifest the time that my daughter will go to the Emmys and I'll have to babysit for her that night. And as I'm watching, one of the things that struck me about this year's crop of great television, which there was so much great television, which ultimately comes back to just great writers telling amazing stories, was something that you hinted at a little bit ago, this idea of, if you can see something, you can be something. And so I'm curious for your take as a woman of color, as a writer, as a woman of color, right? Like, why is it so important that we empower more diverse writers, right? Why is it so important to us societally that we consume more different stories from different writers who may look or sound or come from totally different places than we came from in life?
To me, it comes down to a question of perspective and point of view. I mean, I think that, and Rick Rubin said this in a talk I saw him give. There's a recording of it. And he was talking in the context of AI, which he said, and I agree with, AI by definition does not have a point of view because of the way that it's hoovering up all of these other points of view and putting them into one like amalgam. But it comes down to this question of point of view. And if we only have a narrow set of perspectives and points of view, then what we end up having is a very flat sort of narrative landscape. And when we look around the world, just the natural world, just looking at the diversity of what we're seeing, that also exists in the narrative world. So if we only have, one type of story or storyteller, then that is so drab and it's so uninteresting, and it's really so it's ultimately a false picture of the range of human experience out there. And so I think it's critically important to have points of view and storytellers coming from all different backgrounds, not so much because it's good for these storytellers who come from these different backgrounds, although it certainly is, but because it's good for everybody. It's good for storytelling itself.
I love that. I hadn't thought about it that way.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Shore Capital. In today's venture capital world, it's not just about cash. It's about relationships. Capital is harder to find, limited investors have fewer managers that they can trust, and the industry is just filled with far too much hype. Shore Capital is an early-stage venture fund investing in the world's most ruthlessly iterative founders, helping its limited partners to find founders who are solving the world's most dynamic problems, teams that excel in mastering the idea maze, teams moving with a rapid, iterative velocity and demonstrating radical resourcefulness. Shore Capital doesn't just write checks, though. They become fractional co-founders when needed, offering strategic support, high-leverage relationship development, and a deep commitment to the long-term success of their portfolio companies. If you are a ruthlessly iterative founder with a bold vision or a limited investor seeking sustained access to the brightest big thinkers of our time, Shore Capital wants to meet you. So visit shorecapital.notion.site to learn more.
Boy, you just made me think, I wonder if some of our political societal discourse that we have online, and then you think about the people who don't seemingly get it, right? I wonder if part of that is rooted in this idea that for so long, the story, like the macro story that was told about the American dream or what it means to be an American or what it means to live in America or life, about everything, about every aspect of it, was told by people that looked like me, right? Almost exclusively. And then society, like just demographically grew, evolved, shifted. And like society this is just a thesis here. I'm throwing out for the first time. So I'll be curious, like your thoughts on this. Like, did society get so far out in front of the story that then lots of folks, sadly, lots of folks that look like this, but lots of folks in general, like can't process it because they're like, well, that's not what it means. It's like, no, dude, this is actually what it means. Like, this is what your neighborhood looks like. This is what your city looks like. This is what your town looks like. This is what your rural town looks like, right? These are the people. These are what they're doing. This is why they're here. This is where they came from. Like, this has been true for 30 or 40 years. But we so kind of ingrained people's cultural awareness or sensitivities into like the old narratives, which I don't know why my brain keeps going to this, almost like post-World War II, like sloganism types of narratives, like that, like even the great storytellers of television. I'm thinking like we're white dudes, right? Who were older white dudes. And even if they were telling stories about the Jeffersons, right? I'm thinking of that as a show because I just saw a version of it the other day. And I was like, oh man, I loved that show. And I was a kid because my house was very into like, let's watch alternative points of view. But I'm pretty sure that show was even like instigated by like Norman Lear, who's like arguably one of the most successful television creators of all time, who was just an old successful white dude. So I'm curious, like, do you think there's anything to this idea that like the stories were written by certain types of people for so long and then became so deeply embedded in what we thought we are, that as society actually just outgrew those stories? Now we're having this like, oh, crazy awakening where it's like, well, no, dude, the stories, well, DEI, which is obviously ridiculous conceptualization of something that is just a normal part of society, right? Like, what do you think of that? I'm just spinning this for the first time here.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much to that. There's so much in what you said. And certainly there are systemic and structural reasons why certain voices have been elevated over others and still are. And historically, voices from marginalized people, I'm a Black American woman. Certainly, the voices of Black women in this country have structurally and systemically been suppressed. And what's interesting now is with the technology that we have, um, people now don't have to depend on some of these big gatekeepers that had so much power in the past. Now, each of us has an opportunity to have a platform, although certainly we still have big gatekeepers. Open the newspaper today and actually just look at the front page. You can see that certainly there are media powerhouses and the conglomerates that own much of what's being put out there.
A lot of which are owned by guys that look like me.
Exactly. So, which is why I say it's still going on. It's still difficult for people, voices from marginalized groups to break through. But, with the growth of social media, with the growth of podcasting, and with people's ability just with the internet to communicate outside of, having to go on one of the big 3 networks or, having to go to one of the big newspapers, that's opened up some opportunities, and it's allowed people to have a glimmer of how much richness has been missing and how much truth has been missing from those narratives, the official narratives that for so long were promulgated, and there weren't easy ways around that.
Yeah, a Black woman comes along and writes a story that is an articulation of a moment in history, and then there might be others who would look at that and go, well, that's not right. That's not what happened. It's like objectively, like, no, that's literally exactly what happened. Like, but it can't be, because that's not, and that's what we've stumbled upon, right? Is this like, well, that's not what I heard. Well, okay, but that's fair that's not what you heard, but that's because you didn't pay attention, or because you didn't read sources outside of what was fed to you, or like, now we've got like storytellers from diverse backgrounds, from a wider array of what it is to be a representative human being in today's world, not just the US, but in the whole world, right? Telling those stories. And there's a section of society and humankind that just never really paid attention, just ate the pablum that was fed to them, and assumed it was all correct all the time, right? And it was factual and historic. And now it's like, well, no, that's not. And so then as we do as humans, right, then we demonize the messenger, right, instead of debating the validity of the message. Wow.
Well, and then there's also this idea of, who is allowed to be an authority on things, including their own experience. And, this word author has the same root as the word authority. When you're an author, you have authority. You're asserting authority over a narrative. And, historically, on up to today and through today, there are certain people who are not allowed to have that authority, even over their own experience. I mean, and to that point, I was giving a book talk at the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. the site of Dr. King's assassination. And I was in this conversation, and I learned that, you know, apparently I am the first Black person to solely author a book that was about Dr. King's assassination. So there had been one, I think, or maybe more than one, but these books were co-authored by someone who was not, a Black person. But for a Black person to author this book solely, 55 years at that point after the assassination, it was me. I mean, I had no idea that that it was I who.
Yeah, you're like, I wasn't even trying to be a trailblazer. I was just sharing the story as I saw the story. Wow.
Which is the ironies abound, because I mean, this is a story about a Black iconic civil rights leader, a world leader, in addition to just, a Black leader and, American. And, in a sanitation strike in Memphis, that's what brought him there, that concerned these Black oppressed workers. And yet no Black person had, and I think that.
That's almost, it's almost like, I mean, I believe you, but it is almost unbelievable, right? Like in its context, when you add all those pieces together, because as you say, like, this isn't just no one single particular Black author, writer from Memphis wrote this story about this thing that happened in Memphis. He's a global, iconic, historic figure. Like a Black man or woman from Singapore could have written the book, right? And like the fact that they didn't, and like, thank God you did. I mean, thank God you are exactly who you are.
And I know that there are Black subject matter experts. I mean, I know many of them, so I don't think it's that no one else tried, and then also it came out that I'm the first Black woman to do this. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't other writers that have, written about the assassination.
Oh, of course not.
But to have a book that's really focused on that, that's what I learned at the Civil Rights Museum. And so I think it comes down to the fact that even with our own experiences as, Black people, as marginalized people, we so often are not allowed that authority. It's that someone else has to come in and validate and check behind what we're doing to say, hey, this really is right.
Right. Like I was going to say again, to your see something, be something point that you made earlier, right? It's that there are probably, even sadly, some people in that arc of history who kind of took themselves out of the equation because they didn't see anybody in front of them who'd done this. They only saw people who had written these books who were considered to be the authorities, right, in these contexts. And so like, well, I can't write that book. Like, or I can't write that story that I have inside of me that's unique to me, because I mean, they'd never publish it, then nobody would ever read it, they wouldn't believe it, right? And so we self-modulate and remove ourselves from places where, and again, I say this ultimately respectfully, like maybe you kind of stumbled in to be like, oh wait, I was the first one. Like, that's all okay. That's a double bonus. Like, awesome. That is what I was going for.
I absolutely stumbled in. I mean, like, had I known at the outset that it hadn't been done, then I think that would have given me some extra like trepidation. And I remember when I was doing the research, I was looking for background information, written by Black authors, Black historians, and, finding a dearth of that and wondering like, where are the Black authors and sources for this information? And this is not to malign, folks who are not Black. I mean, because there's great scholarship that was done. I mean, David Garrow, the acclaimed historian, Pulitzer Prize winning academic who has written extensively about Dr. King, Jonathan Eig, I mean, there are some great folks, from all communities who have done this work. But I still think that it really speaks volumes that there haven't been those Black voices and marginalized voices that have made it into the libraries about this event that goes to the heart of Black American history, as well as, American history and world history.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to and this is how prepared we are, I'm going to skip ahead and you're going to know what I mean when I say that, because although we weren't going to make, and we're not going to make this entire conversation, the whole podcast about this book, like now that we've kind of gone into this part of the history of this discussion, like talk to us about it. Like tell us a bit about the story, why you wrote this book, what the book was about, etc.
Yes. So there's a famous photograph that probably, most people who are listening to this have or watching this have seen. And it is a photo that was taken in the immediate aftermath of Dr. King's assassination on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. And in this photograph, Dr. King lies on his back on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, having just been shot. There are several people who are standing around him, pointing in the direction from which the shot came. But there is a man that most people don't notice who is kneeling beside Dr. King, and with his right hand, he's holding a white towel to Dr. King's wounded jaw. And that man is my father. And I've known that from, age 4 or 5 at least. And my mom always told me and my little brother that, this is your father, in this famous photograph, he was a Memphis police officer. That's why he was there. My parents divorced when I was younger. And so I was raised by, primarily my mom with the help of her family. So that's all anyone, like she or anyone else, would ever say about that photo. Well, I learned later as a junior in high school that he wasn't just any Memphis police officer, responding to a crime. He was an undercover police officer who was infiltrating a black activist group called the Invaders. And it was through that work that he found himself on that balcony that day. And it was because of those circumstances and the fact that several years after that, he went on to a career at the Central Intelligence Agency that conspiracy theories began to swirl around him, accusing him of being involved in the murder of Dr. King. And so for a long time, I just viewed this entire story with horror and dread and resolved really to have as little to do with it as possible, and kind of compartmentalized it in my mind, went on with my life, and thought that, that was going to be the way that I continued to exist. But it was only after I'd had 2 of my 3 sons that I started to think about the unfairness of passing down to my children the same horror and dread, and also this question mark about what happened and, my father and what really happened that day, and who he really was, and how could he infiltrate this group that was ostensibly fighting for Black people. And also there was this sense of historical responsibility because this was also a missing puzzle piece of history. And so that is when I decided to embark on telling the story. And it started with having this very awkward conversation with my dad, where I just out of the blue decided to broach the subject. And he was very willing to share with me everything that had happened, the never before told story.
Was he retired? Was he retired at that point professionally?
He retired at that point. So when I first asked him about it, this would have been in 2010. And so he retired from the CIA in 1999 after 25 years of service. And then for about a decade after that, he worked contract, but then retired from that. And so it was after he was fully retired that we started having this conversation, which ended up taking us down that historical path and through his earliest and very painful memories, going back to 1940s and 50s Mississippi on through the 60s and beyond, and into the halls of the Central Intelligence Agency, into the home of Ambassador Andrew Young, who was one of Dr. King's close aides and who was also on that balcony and in that photograph. And so that's the evolution of how the Kneeling Man book came to be.
Wow.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at eSudo. Running any business, but especially a law firm, means balancing a lot. And technology, frankly, shouldn't be a headache. eSudo makes information technology and cybersecurity simple for law firms large or small. With over 20 years of experience, they specialize in everything from Microsoft 365 management to advanced cybersecurity solutions. They help you to stay ahead of threats, manage your data securely, and keep your tech running smoothly so that you can focus on what matters most, your clients. eSudo understands the legal industry's unique needs, offering tailored solutions to ensure that your firm is always in compliance and always protected. Are you ready to upgrade your firm's technology or get help with your questions? Visit esudo.com.
After you wrote it, I love that your sons, the birth of your sons, was kind of a catalyst, right? As a mom, as a human being, to think legacy, kind of to think longer term beyond just our own selfish existence in the world, right? Where you, as you say, there was a whole period of your youth where you're like, bubble it off and stick it in the closet. Like, I don't want to know like what I didn't know. But I love that you found some clarity in that and you found some purpose in it. I'm curious though, like, was there ever a moment after you read it or after you released it to the world, and then other people can have their opinions and start to inundate you with that, where you wish that you hadn't written it?
There might have been, I mean, the closest I came to feeling that way was a time when I think someone texted me that there was a conversation going on about my dad on Twitter and X, I guess. I don't know. I have to call it Twitter. And so I went in there, and it was one of these conspiracy types of threads, but now, they've got my dad's name and, a couple of people. I mean, it wasn't all sort of terrible. There were a lot of terrible comments, but then there were people who were saying, look, there's been a book written about this. This is the author, and, tagging me. I mean, by this point, I had already sort of like left. I mean, I still have an account on there, but I don't really hang out on there anymore like I used to. But so, there were people who were bringing up this narrative, which, I mean, I was grateful that now there is a counter story to the lie and the conspiracy theory. But, in those comments, there were death threats. And so it kind of made me think, oh, I don't know if we really want to just be out here in the public eye. But I mean, I really didn't let that thought linger for long, because I'm always on the side of truth. And I feel that it takes some fortitude to really live a meaningful life and tell the truth. And if I'm not going to have the moral courage and the physical courage to tell a truthful historical story, then what am I doing, as a professional and, just as a human?
Yeah. I thank you for sharing that vulnerably. Again, it's an incredible story. I just started reading it. My daughter already was like, when I told her we were going to be having this conversation in advance, she was like, "That's it. Like, send me the link. I'm buying the book. Like, I got to read this." Right. So it'll be part of our family lexicon for years and years and years to come. My grandson will probably read it at some point. Right. So thank you for that, for contributing your story to the rest of us, that we can persist in pushing it forward so that it becomes established as the truth of the moment. Right. What an incredible story. All right. So to shift gears a little bit more kind of present day, current stuff, two questions for us to attack a little bit before we finish up. One is just because of the context of how we met on Threads and online. I had already alluded to it before. I could see that you were a really effective storyteller, obviously a very fierce advocate of what you believe is right or what you believe is truth. I'm curious, in that world that we live in, where we met, where algorithms draw us into these pitched, I call them enragement, engagement moments, how can we learn to best use our words online to foster this sort of better world that we want to live in?
I think that with communication, with storytelling, like anything else in life, we should begin with the end in mind. And so keeping in mind, positive ends and our core values, which for me are always uplifting these values of life and freedom and dignity. I try to keep those intentions in mind as I'm embarking on any kind of communication, any kind of contact with people. And so I think that if you allow yourself to be guided by those good intentions, then those good intentions will have their course set. It's kind of like having that compass. I mean, really like the moral compass to guide those communications.
And having that moral compass in your pocket no matter where you go to communicate. So it's not like, oh, I'm online, this isn't who I am. Well, no, this is who you are, right? Like, I hate that phrase, like, oh, this is not how I am. No, this is, you did it, like, you wrote it, this is who you are. It may not be who you wanted to be, but like, and it may not be how you conduct yourself at work or at school or somewhere else, but this is definitely who you're allowing yourself to be here. Maybe because the online world invites or intoxicates us with that like idea of just leave your moral compass over here for a little bit. Like, you come over here and you can just be whatever you want to be.
The keyboard warrior. And, that's not the way to be. There are a number of reasons why that's not the way to be. But I mean, that's why when I'm communicating with someone, regardless of the medium, I think of it as if, we're still human beings. Just because I'm using a digital tool doesn't separate that part out. And so talk to this person like you're talking to them face to face. And you never know, because some people might come meet you where you are, if not metaphorically, perhaps physically as well. So it's good to be smart in all those ways.
Yeah, I used to use that adage all the time. I used to tell my daughter too and her friends. I was like, hey, it's a lot harder to hate someone that you're literally standing in front of. Right. It's real easy to hate metaphorical avatar strangers on something that feels super distant at the end of your phone. But it's a lot harder to actually hate a person who's different than you or has a different view than you if you're confronted with them, because then you realize the humanity of us all, right? As you just said.
Exactly. It's a lot harder to dehumanize this physical human being that's right in front of you. And I think that's part of the problem is people are disconnecting from that understanding.
So last question, it's going to dovetail right off that, right before we get to our closing segment question. So in today's very politically dangerous times, how important is it to all of us, to the collective us, that we write our opinions, that we write our dissent, that we write our beliefs? How important is that, even maybe more so today than ever before?
It is as important and as crucial as it has ever been in history, because again, this idea of connection, and there's so many forces that are operating in such a way as to cause us to break community with each other and to break the community that we have with each other. And one way to hold our communities together is by connecting and stitching those relationships through our words and through storytelling, through building community, through sharing our humanity, and through what makes us human. I mean, it's this idea of empathy. It's this idea of, as I referenced at the beginning, taking these, flight simulators of other people's lives to have us understand in a very meaningful way what it is to be human with a point of view that is not our own, and in the richness of the cultures and the perspectives and the many people who exist with us in this world. We're on this little blue spinning ball that is, moving through space, and we got to share it. And if we can't keep our community, then we will all perish as fools. And, I'm mashing up a lot of metaphors at this point and
it's great.
paraphrasing people, but you get the meaning that, again, it comes down to whether we're going to make or break community, and storytelling is a way to stitch us together.
And at the end of the day, right, in this world of, and I love this medium, I love podcasts, I love the ability, the possibility, I should say, of like remote relationship that can be built through technologies like this, and audio podcasts and text, digital, all that stuff. Like, all those are useful, but there is still something powerful about writing out your thoughts, right? Writing out your story, and then reading the written thoughts, words of someone else's interpretation of that experience, that moment. Yeah.
That's right. And it's engaging. It's a two-way street. So we're writing and we're putting our stories out there for people to connect with, but we're also reading. And, again, I can't advocate enough for reading. The best writers are the best readers.
Yeah, no, 100%. All right. Last question. We didn't talk about this a lot, but I did touch on it in your introduction. You're a essayist / reform lawyer, right? So a defense attorney inside the federal government, if I understood your background correctly, as I was reading up on you. So this last question is maybe to the people who are listening, who are kind of considering changes in their careers, kind of pivots or putting themselves in new directions professionally, or maybe even just the creative exercises, right? So to go from that life as a reformed lawyer, to all my lawyer friends, right, who comes over and becomes arguably one of the more creative paths that you could possibly choose, what you're doing now, and then sharing that with others. Like, what are the first few questions, one or two questions, prompts that someone should be asking themselves if they are thinking about, like, I don't want to be a lawyer. Like, I hate being a lawyer. I am a closeted author. I'm a future podcaster. I should make movies. That's what I've always wanted to do, right? Like, what are one or two questions that someone, having gone through this kind of shift in your own life, what are one or two questions that someone should be asking themselves?
I would say first, what lights me up? What makes me excited? If I could plan an activity that would make me excited to get out of bed in the morning, what would that be? And it might not be one thing. It probably isn't. Figure out a list of those things, and then find the intersections with what you're really good at, where your aptitude lies. And then if you can do those things and actually be rewarded for your labor, because, art is labor, art is work, and it should be compensated. If you can find the intersection of, what lights you up, where your aptitudes lie, and what will allow you to be compensated in a non-insulting way for your labor, then I think you've hit on something.
I love that. That is excellent guidance. And I would say also, I don't think it's as dramatic, me personally, don't think it's as dramatic a career evolution as some might perceive it to be, because I fundamentally know from all my experience with all my lawyer friends, like, attorneys are great storytellers.
You have to be an attorney, you have to be a good storyteller. For sure.
I mean, like there's the Perry Mason thing, like people in the courtroom. Okay, but you also have corporate boardrooms, just like courtrooms. Like, I mean, like, you're weaving the story on behalf of your clients. So the fact that I'd like to think you less pivoted, like you evolved.
That's exactly right. I think I hope that I have been, as the years have progressed, I hope I've been becoming more of, myself and who I am, in all of the messiness and, things that happen. Like, for example, if you heard that alarm, that was an alarm to pick up one of my kids. So even though you think you've done everything right, put your phone on like silent and focus, like do not disturb. But then real life comes crashing through. And I think it's beautiful. And I think, we all contain multitudes, and being able to explore those multitudes and evolve is part of what makes us human as well. I mean, nature, we see that in nature. We see that in the way that a tree or a flower, these things have seasons and they evolve and they look different at different times. Humans are doing the same, and I think it is an organic path and a beautiful thing.
100%. Could not have said it better. I want to thank you for this. I want to thank you for the conversation. I had this crazy idea in my head that I wanted to apply my thesis of entrepreneurial thinking, and that there are things in every aspect of our society and our lives in which we need to be guided on how to think about them differently than we may think about them, because they are intrinsically important to our world and our lives. And so for you to indulge me and explore this with me today, I know already, so like my hardcore entrepreneur investor types who are listening to this, they're going to listen to this and go like, wow, like that, like, oh, okay, we opened up our minds, right? And to the creatives in us, they're going to listen to us and go, yes, 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 what they said, that's awesome, like, which is great. So thank you so deeply for that. Really, really, really appreciate it. This is exactly what I was hoping for when I reached out to you. So thank you for that. And before we finish up, how can folks find you or follow you if you'd like them to? Or how can they find the program if they're interested in this postgraduate program to study? If they want to learn how to become a better writer, they should do so at the University of Nevada, Reno, Lake Tahoe campus in the low residency program. So how can we find and follow sites, addresses, et cetera?
Yes. So social media, I mean, I hang out there a lot. That's where we met, and it's a great place. I love talking to people and meeting people on there. So I am on Threads a lot, and my handle is at LA underscore Seletzky, Seletzky. I'm also on Blue Sky at LetaSeletsky.com. So that's LetaSeletsky.com.
Awesome.
And you can also find me on Instagram, same handle as Threads. You can actually just click through my profile. And then I want people to find our low residency Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program at www.unr.edu/liberal-MFA-creative-writing. That's a long one, but I think it's pretty easy to get. So, and I have a website. I need to drive more traffic there.
Do that. Yeah. Let's sell some books.
And I need to actually work on that because, recent developments have just reinforced for me the importance of having one's own platform so that we're not so beholden to other folks. So LetaSeletsky.com, I'll be building that out and putting, hopefully media such as your brilliant podcast links to that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for the kind words there. And all of what you just said, including that really long title, website address from the university, we'll put it in our show notes so people can find it there in the show notes as well and click right through and go to it and find you more easily and whatnot. But again, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm not going to be the person standing between you and picking up your son from school.
I have somebody else to do that. That's just that's a relic, or
that's the reminder that it's happening right now.
Which is that somebody needs to do it. But I've already made the arrangement. I just didn't turn off the alarm.
That's awesome. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful for the conversation. I'm going to see my daughter in a little bit here when I go to babysit tonight, and I already know she's going to be asking how this conversation went, so I'll be excited to share some of the stories.
Excellent. I love it.
Thank you.
And congratulations, by the way, on being a grandpa. That's great.
Best job ever. And also maybe so far the easiest job ever, but definitely the best job ever. So I say that with a little bit of trepidation because tonight I'm probably going to be changing them and feeding them. So we might be not the easiest job ever after tonight, but it's still definitely the best job. So thank you for that.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
My pleasure. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. We can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.